everybody. Before we start, can I say that if you're here for you can't hear? Is that better? If you're here for Eleanor's talk on how the Renaissance came to Bath, you're in the right place. If you're here for the climate change talk, it's next door. Okay, well, look, welcome everybody. Enjoy your evening. It can be a bit confusing sometimes. Anyway, welcome. My name's David Hall. I'm on the trustee board here at Whimsy, and I'd like to welcome you here for the talk tonight. Before we start, can I just say that to everybody in the room, if you hear the fire alarm, it is for real. Please go down the stairs, outside, turn right, and then at the end of the buildings, turn right again and wait there for the fire brigade. If anybody needs the lift to get down, please don't try to use it, but wait by the lift and assistance will come. We have a fascinating evening ahead of us. Look at how Bath is experiencing the immense good fortune to have a substantial collection of Renaissance treasures for us all to enjoy. This talk, How the Renaissance Came to Bath, is part of a year-long series continuing until June. And tonight we'll hear about mainly Northern Renaissance magnificence. Then on Wednesday we switch south, looking at the academies of the Italian Renaissance, and on Thursday we hear about science in the global Renaissance. So if you really want a Renaissance fix, you've got a busy week ahead of you. Then look out in March for another talk which will feature some treasures from Bath, also to do with the Renaissance, about Renaissance maps, which are one of the precious possessions of the Bath American Museum. But now, let me introduce tonight's speaker, Eleanor Powlesland, who's the curator at the Holburne Museum, which I'm sure you all know, and is also a bit of a Renaissance specialist. She's been a very good friend to this institution, and in 2024, she arranged the loan from the Holburne of 2 paintings by the same artist whose work graces our ceiling above you. So we're very grateful to her, and also for her coming along today to talk to us. We hope we have time for questions at the end, and if any of the audience, there's about 30 people online, would like to pose a question, please put it in the chat and we will read it out for the audience in the room. So let me welcome Eleanor Powlesland. Thank you, Eleanor.
Lovely. Thank you very much, David, and thank you everybody for coming. It's a real joy to be here with you this evening. And it's, as David said, I work at the Holburn, so it's my joy to be able to work not only with our ever-changing temporary exhibition programme, but also our permanent collection. And the reason we're all here tonight to also talk about this big project that we've had going on behind the scenes for most of last year and a little bit of the year before, and that was unveiled to the public in September of last year. So I'm hoping some of you have had a chance to see what we've been busy doing, but if you haven't, I'm hoping I might be able to encourage you to go and have a look after this. I'm going to try and talk as slowly as I can, because I'm finding 6th month of pregnancy is making me very out of breath. So I will apologise now if I have to take a moment to catch my breath. And if anyone can't hear me or need me to repeat anything or slow down, please do just say. And as David said, there will also be time for plenty of questions at the end, should you have them. Oh, I failed at the first hurdle now. Thank you very much. That was me making my PowerPoint too fancy, clearly. So I'm sure, all good, yeah, thank you. I'm sure many of you are also very, very familiar with the Holburn, so forgive me for potentially boring you. But for those of you who aren't as familiar with the Holburn, that's at the end of Great Pulteney Street, It was built originally as a hotel, so between 1796 and 1799. It was kind of built as a hotel in the entrance to the Georgian Pleasure Gardens, which are still there today, and you can now enjoy for free. But originally you had to pay to get in. You had to have your token for Sydney Gardens, which is what you can see here is effectively the Holburn building was your gateway to that space. It's been home to the Holburn collection since 1916. The building had previous lives before that, and the collection lived in various places before that. But from 1916, it's been home to the Holburn collection. So what is the Holburn collection? So the Holburn collection itself was founded originally by one man, William Holbein. This man here. And so he came from a naval family, and he was a second son of quite well-to-do naval family. So he was never intended to kind of inherit the family title or the bulk of the family fortune. But on the death of his elder brother, he took on the post and did what so many men of this period did of means, and almost immediately went on a grand tour. And so we think this is where his kind of bug for collecting came from. We know, sadly, very little about the kind of thought process behind his collecting. But I think for those of you who've been to the Holbein, you do get a sense of this kind of slightly eclectic personal collection, which we've been very lucky since it was gifted to the city by his surviving sister in 1882 as the foundation of a museum for Bath. Ever since then, we've been able to evolve and expand the collection to the point where we're still collecting works today, including modern and contemporary works. So it's ever evolving, ever changing. So always come and visit us because there's always something new to look at, including the Renaissance Treasury, which is what we're talking about this evening, which is a really interesting moment for us at the Holbein because we do already have part of our original Holbein collection touches on the Renaissance in a kind of fairly delicate way. We've got a decent collection of Italian Renaissance pictures, also some Italian bronzes and maiolica. Those of you who've been in our ballroom, that's mainly where we show that work. We're also particularly well known for our 18th century British portraits by the likes of Thomas Gainsborough, Thomas Lawrence. So it's really lovely to be able to show such a breadth of art history. But yeah, this Renaissance moment for us feels really quite special, and it's lovely to be able to coincide it with Brilsey's moment for celebrating the Renaissance. So as I said, we've always been evolving at the Holbein. We've never stopped. And so after the collection moved into the original building in 1916, another significant moment in our history was back in 2011 with this quite dramatic extension that happened on the back, which essentially doubled our space, doubled our capacity. And it's where a lot of our temporary exhibitions are now housed, and it's also where a lot of William Holbein's original collection is also housed. And now underneath this, well, what is now the cafe, underneath this space is the rooms that we're going to be talking about today. So, this project that we've had going on, what is it? I refer to it by many names. It does have an official name, and it's the Schroeder Gallery. But we've been calling it the Treasury, we've been calling it the Renaissance Gallery, because it encapsulates many different things. So as I said, in September last year, this opened to the public, brand new gallery space, and also almost an extra onto this amazing project already. We opened a slightly smaller gallery on our first floor as well. So we had two brand new galleries which we got to open. And as a bonus to this part of the project, we also got to open another part of our permanent collection. We got to put another 200 objects on display, which is now part of the free offer. You don't need a ticket to see that part. So if anyone's used the loo at the Holborn now, which are also much nicer, we've also been able to include this display of works that were previously languishing in store. So it's been a really exciting moment for us. This large gallery was originally two back-of-house art stores, basically. So this is a whole lot of things that had to happen to bring this collection of Renaissance treasures to Bath, and it's been really special to be involved in it. So what is the Schroeder collection? It's one of the most astonishing and remarkable collections, private collections, in this country and also internationally. at the core of this collection is Renaissance silver, which was the impetus for this gallery. But you've also got bronzes, you've got paintings, you've got maiolica, which we also get to see in this gallery, which is really exciting. So we get to bring all these different materials together. We've also, in the little gallery I mentioned that we opened upstairs, which I won't spend too much time talking about this evening, so I do encourage you to come and visit. The small gallery we opened on our first floor is primarily 17th century Dutch Golden Age pictures. So all of these things are adding to the offer that we already have at the Holburn. But this is something that we get to see that's really special. So what is the Schroder collection? So it was a collection that was primarily built in the second half of the 1800s into the early 1930s by two generations of the Anglo-German banking family, the Schroders. The history of the family itself can be traced back to the second half of the 1600s, where one of the original Schroders set up a tobacco factory near Bremen. And from there, the family's fortune increased through trading of a wide range of goods. By the 18th century, the family had built their own fleet of ships to continue their trade and cut out the middleman, and they developed a network of family firms across Europe. The first Schroder firm in London was a merchant trading and insurance company that was founded in 1800. And it was the son of one of these founders, who you can see on the left of the screen. So John Henry Schroder was the founder of the Schroder collection. He was also the first of the family to settle in England with his wife. And in 1864, and this is the same year that he became a naturalised British citizen, that he and his wife bought what's called the Dell. So this was a former royal hunting lodge near Windsor, and buying this place gave them the opportunity to drastically expand their collection. On the right-hand side, you can see two more portraits. This is Baron Bruno and his wife Emma, who also had a huge effect on the building of the Schroder collection. They were incredibly passionate, and they took John Henry's passion and they just ran with it, and they were particularly interested in building the Renaissance aspect of the collection. So it's really what you can see at the Holbein today. But it meant the collection expanded to cover right from the Middle Ages right up until the 20th century. They were really, really interested. They were also very passionate academics, so what they were buying wasn't just on the advice of various dealers. They were doing their own research, and they really cared about these objects. So this continued even after they'd collected things. So following the death of Baron Bruno in 1940, the collection remained dormant for a few years. But new life was breathed into it by Bruno Lionel Schroder, who was particularly passionate and wanted to kind of take up the bastion. And he was the one who was also especially interested in the 17th century Dutch pictures. So that was thanks to him that we also have those on display. So he died in 2019, and so it's his daughter Leonie, who we've been working with and very lucky to be working with, that brought this whole project about, essentially. She and he are and were very passionate about making this collection public for the first time. So it was gathered in such a passionate way, but now it's about sharing it with the public and allowing the public to see it. And it's to see a collection in one space of this quality, you'd have to go to the V&A in London or the Met in New York, really. So how did this project come about? So this was something that was completely out of the blue, incredibly fortuitous for us. Back in the depths of COVID, my colleague received an email from a curator of a private collection that we'd never heard of before, saying, "Would you like to borrow a painting?" I said, "Oh, intriguing, can we come and have a look?" So we went and had a look, and they had more than just the one painting. And we turned around to them and we said, "If we give you a space, can we take more?" Because we're always very good at the Holborn about, if you don't ask, you don't get. And so we dedicated space to it. We kicked our director out of his office, and we made a small gallery. So for anyone who is familiar with our picture gallery on the second floor, the little gallery that's just off of that that is where we first showed 9 paintings from the Schroder collection. So Northern European, primarily from the Netherlands and the German provinces of the time, by the likes of Holbein the Elder, Cranach, Berkmeyer, who, the eagle-eyed amongst you might have noticed, this is actually painted in Bruno's portrait, which I think is a really lovely nod and shows how he felt about his collection. So that's where the relationship began, and we were very lucky to be able to show works that we hadn't really got represented in the collection before. This was a new avenue for us. But that's how the relationship with the Schroders began and the conversations began. But in that same visit to this very discreet warehouse to see these paintings, noticed that there was this little silver object on a shelf, and thought, that's intriguing. And it turned out that was a very small representative of a much bigger collection, and in fact, the core of the Schroder collection. And that's where that conversation began. So we've been incredibly fortunate to work with this family, not only because they've been generous enough to kind of start to share this collection with the public, but also because it's been a very expensive project that they have also funded. So it's been an amazing act of philanthropy, and we're very, very lucky to have been able to enjoy the benefits of it. So I said that silver is at the core of this collection. But there's so many more things that you can see. And so that was a huge part of where the conversations even began, of a bit like with the paintings, we didn't have a space for any of this stuff. And there was just so much, primarily from the Renaissance period, but a lot to pick from earlier and later. So we slightly had to kind of constrain ourselves to actually make this possible. But in terms of the parameters of the project, as I said, to make the gallery space, we converted 2 stores into one big gallery, which in the first instance required moving our entire collection in store. And there's people in this room who've actually worked on that project. It was a lot of hard work of a lot of people. But there was about 8,500 objects that had to be moved before anything could be done, before any builders could come on site. And so that's required us to move this collection of ours in store into 2 new stores, as well as an off-site store. And then this is when architects and builders started to work out how we could make these 2 very outdated, old, cumbersome back-of-house stores into a place that celebrates this collection. So this is a little sneaky look at what it now looks like. Quite a dramatic transformation. So the idea behind the space, and I think what became quite quickly apparent at the beginning of this project, is these objects are so special. They really do speak for themselves. So how do you present them? How do you do them justice? And it was quite quickly decided to go for this idea of Kunstkammer, either a kind of an art chamber, a cabinet of curiosities, one of these princely treasuries that were common throughout the Renaissance. You know, the kind of sovereigns and the kind of leaders of the Holy Roman Empire of the period, anyone with the means and the connections kind of had these sumptuous treasuries, often kind of basement level, dark, intimate spaces to kind of showcase these collections. So many of these items have always been intended to just basically show off, not always intended for use. But that's not to say everything was the case. So we worked with various different companies to kind of start to put this design and create this idea of a gallery, while also very excitingly getting to start to choose what objects to include. These objects showcase the most exquisite craftsmanship, but also global trade in that period, in the Renaissance. You've got materials coming from all over the world. You've got rock crystal, you've got rubies, you've got pearls. You know, the best that money can buy, but also the best craftsmanship that money could buy at this time. So I'm using the term Renaissance Gallery, which I know is quite a loaded term, and there's plenty of speakers who've talked at length in this run of talks about what is the Renaissance. I'm being a bit lazy this evening by interchanging the meaning a few times. But if we take the idea of the revival of classical antiquity in the 15th century, as quoted by Walter Pater in 1873, if we take that as the starting point for this gallery, that's kind of where we begin. So when you enter the gallery, this is one of the first cases you might see. And this is because this is the display of the earliest work. These works are primarily medieval, with the earliest object dating from around the end of the 12th, early 13th century. This stunning reliquary made of rock crystal. But the rest of the gallery shows a more Renaissance group of objects. So I mentioned that this is celebrating, in terms of its materiality and its craftsmanship, it really is celebrating the wonders of the natural and the man-made world. And this was so much the idea behind these kind of Kunstkammers, these cabinet of curiosities. It really was marvelling at, whether it's the kind of idea behind God's creation at the time, but really celebrating what the natural world had to offer, but also what people could do with these things. What's also really lovely, and the reason I included this picture, is because what's unusual with this gallery is to be able to, one, put the paintings that have lived at the Holburn since 2019 into context amongst all these other objects. But also it's unusual to have a display of Renaissance objects that don't separate the Southern and the Northern Renaissance, because so often we talk about them in different kind of terms, in different conversations. But in fact, to be able to show this kind of widespread influence in one gallery space is really, really special. There's also a lot happening in this time period, and it was more than we could have possibly ever tried to sum up in this one gallery space, but we did our best to summarize. Some of the developments that are happening in this period, particularly things like the development of the printing press and the idea of the spread of and circularization, standardization of images, ideas, medical texts, is all happening in this time. So there are huge advancements, whether it was in terms of how the science that goes into making some of these objects, but also just the sharing of ideas, so you can see so many influences through these different objects. And I'm going to take a closer look at just a few of them shortly, so you can kind of really get a sense of that. It's hard to escape the idea in this gallery, and it's definitely part of the kind of atmosphere we were going for, is the sheer opulence, the sheer wealth of these things. And what's really amazing about these objects, which is quite often so rare, even with some really special objects in museums, is the fact that so many of them, we can trace their provenance and their ownership right from their creation to modern day. And to be able to do that with so many objects in one space is really unusual. And in fact, when you have a chance to have a look at some of these objects, some of their names kind of allude to this. They're given these names that are not necessarily suggestive of perhaps the person who commissioned them, but they might be a later owner. And there's some really interesting things to tease out in terms of stories behind these objects, that they've lived a life for hundreds of years already. And so now we're just a small part of its story. So this is a good place to start in terms of looking at some of the kind of star objects. It's quite tricky to pick star objects because there's just so many to choose from. But this is definitely one of them. So this is a Nautilus cup. It's silver gilt. It's made from a Nautilus shell. It's got gemstones on it. And it's also carved with a Chinese processional scene, which you might be able to see a little bit easier in that right-hand picture. So the shell itself comes from the Indian Ocean, and that was brought to Europe, and they were brought in quite vast quantities to Europe by the Portuguese and traded as rare curiosities. The shell was then carved in China around 1580, 1590. We haven't actually been able to decipher what the procession is. So if anyone has any ideas, please do let us know. This is part of the joy of being able to share this collection now, is hopefully we start to make new discoveries as people get to see these things. And then on top of that, the kind of making it into a cup with what it's, the silver gilt it's mounted on was made in Nuremberg. So it's a really interesting example to show how many hands have been involved in the creation of these objects and how many different phases some of these objects have had before you get to the final product essentially that we have now. And the mounts, as I say, modelled in Germany, following astrological design. So you've got Apollo and you've got Jupiter, you've got Mercury, you've got Venus, you've got Mars, you've got Saturn, all carved around the rim. So astonishing level of detail that goes into these things. I said a lot of these objects didn't get used, and we can tell a lot of them didn't get used, not only because they seem so precious, even when they were made they would have seemed precious, but also because we can see that there's just not that many scratches and marks on the insides of a lot of these things. But that doesn't mean to say everything was untouchable, but things like this and so much of what's on display in the gallery were brought out at these grand banquets. So for the most part, these objects were kind of lived in these treasury spaces, which people might be brought down to, kind of special visitors might be brought down to and kind of shown a kind of glimpse of these treasuries. But then when it came to these big parties, this stuff just was kind of laid out on long banquet tables. And some of this stuff was definitely used for some big parties. There's a very, very very big wine cooler in the gallery, which you can definitely tell was used for big sumptuous parties. As was this thing. So this is the Schwarzburg Nef, which was made for the Knights of Malta, also around 1580, funnily enough, made from a combination of silver parcel gilt and cold enamel. This was used as a ewer to drink from at banquets, which I find bonkers personally. There is a little hole in the deck that you would pour liquid into, and you would have a little spout that you take the cap off the end, little spouts, and so you could pour your drink from it. Whether this was actually used, I find slightly hard to believe, because it's the most astonishing thing. It also is quite precarious. But it really demonstrates what some of these banquets were trying to do. It was the ultimate moment to impress. So this was probably made in Germany or the southern Netherlands. And nef is the old French word for ship. But quite often these kinds of containers were used purposefully for ewers in banquets. Sometimes they would also have other purposes. They might be used to contain salt, when salt was a particularly expensive commodity. But they were always, processed out for these elaborate banquets. And even the figures have such astonishing detail to them. And every part of this can move. The oars can move. The rudder can move. Not as an automatron, but they were all kind of pieced together. So these things had this kind of dynamism and movement to them. One of my personal favourites, this one, Celestial Globe. Commissioned in 1575 by Landgrave Wilhelm IV of Hesse-Kassel, who, like so many other royal princes and sovereigns of the Holy Roman Empire in this period, were particularly interested in the movement of the stars and the constellations. But Wilhelm seemed to take it another step further, and in fact, a contemporary observer of the time commented to say that he was always known for travelling with three things: a Bible, a small quadrant, and a self-moving celestial globe, which is almost certainly this. And when we came to install it, it's the most astonishingly heavy thing you could possibly imagine. So just the idea that he was even travelling with this in the beginning is quite astonishing. This is one of very few globes of this type to survive anywhere in the world. I'm going to slightly cheat here because the amount of things that this globe actually does is astonishing. So the photos I've put up show you some couple more angles of the globe itself, but also the mechanism that once lived inside it. So the internal mechanism once it was inside it, what this globe could actually tell you. This is where I'm listing it and cheating. So this could tell you the date and mean solar time, the sun's amplitude, true noon, sidereal time, the times of sunrise and sunset, the rising culmination and setting of the stars indicated on the surface of the globe, the position of the stars in the sky at any time of day of the year, and the position of the planets and the comets. You know, just a few things to it. But what really clinches it for me, and I think is absolutely mind-boggling, if you can see the cog at the very top, and this is what you do need to come and have a look in person, the teeth look like they are perfectly equidistant, and that is what is moving the globe to track the calendar year. And they look equidistant, but there is enough subtle differences in point whatever of a millimetre to account for the difference in seconds every day that accumulates to the leap year. 1580. I think this is absolutely mind-boggling and just such an astonishing thing to be able to have on display. And it does still technically work, we've been told. You can't see that in the gallery, but there's lots of horologists who have kind of looked a lot at this clock. And yes, we have been assured that it can work if we wanted it to. That's not to say it's all really serious. I think there's a really beautiful amount of kind of whimsy that you can find in this gallery, and hopefully might be slightly more appealing to a younger audience as well. I don't think any of this you can take too seriously. I think you can tell there was something to be said for the amount of excess and just sheer madness of some of these things. But I think that's really demonstrated quite nicely with a smaller bit towards the end of the gallery that you can see. I've included these lovely little owls because these are some of my favourites. These are drinking vessels. So these were quite often taken out on hunts, again, by the kind of princes of the Holy Roman Empire. But also things like puzzle jugs and playing cards. So these puzzle jugs were for drinking games, you know. So I think this is something that really feels like it unites us back through the ages. We haven't really all changed that much. This one, this puzzle jug here on the right, it's probably one of the most unassuming looking ones in the gallery. Everything else is dripping in silver and gold. This one's slightly more unassuming. But the way that this worked as a puzzle jug is you'd fill it with your wine, and then the test would be who can work out how to drink it without spilling it on themselves and it coming out of the several different spouts and holes. I don't know if anyone does know. I'd be curious to know if anyone knows the secret of having come across one of these before. But the secret is that there is a little hole in the handle that you plug with your finger, and that's how it stops it. Also, these astonishing set of playing cards. There's also the box that they were designed for is also on display in the gallery. We think these ones in particular were made in the Netherlands or Germany around the late 16th century. But playing cards were widespread in Europe at this time, from at least the 14th century actually. And suits were not standardised by the 16th century, so you might be able to, eagle-eyed amongst you might be able to see some here that you have all sorts of different suits. You have hearts, you have bells, leaves, acorns were particularly common for Germany in particular. But also just the bonkers idea that these are silver. You know, they're incredibly slippery. You couldn't have used them practically. These really were for showing off. Also, the figures depicted are a mixture of European, Turkish, and Russian costume that you can see worn. So again, it's kind of all of these objects are really showing that the people who own these things were wealthy, but they were also knowledgeable. They understood the wider world. So I really do think these are a nice kind of group of images to end on, because I think it just summarises quite how quirky some of these things are, which feels particularly appropriate for the Holbein, I think. So what now for the Holbein? What's really special about this collection is these objects are now here on a minimum 20-year loan. We like to hope it will be slightly longer than 20 years, but for now, it's here for 20 years. And the little 17th century Dutch gallery that I mentioned is on a similar commitment of minimum of 20 years, but the display will be changing every 2 years. Because that gallery is quite small, we can only fit so many things in. So you're going to have to just keep coming back and visiting us, because every 2 years you'll be able to see more and more. As I said, it's an astonishing collection for the first time on public display. So it's a really rare opportunity to be able to see this. But you don't need to rush, because it's here for a decent amount of time. I'm also going to plug the book that we created. I say we, this was lots of other people's hard work. This was produced to accompany the gallery. And it goes into a lot more detail than I have done this evening, talking about some of these themes, and it also includes a catalogue of every object that's in there. Really beautiful publication. You can buy that in the Holburne shop. And I'll stop trying to make you spend money now and just say thank you very much for listening. And if anyone has any questions, please do let me know.